Nature-Based Solutions. Thank you very much. Head of Nature-Based Solutions from Kent Wildlife Trust. So he'll be chatting us through our kind of Save Our Stour campaign, which is focusing on river pollution in Kent. So we're talking a bit about what's happening in Kent across our rivers, and we'll be talking about some of the ways that you can help as well. So first of all, just Dan, if you can go to the next slide, just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, just so we are obviously recording this session. If you've got any questions, we do have an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end, or please do feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom. Obviously, please get involved. If you've got any kind of comments or thoughts, or you wanted to post any particular links, then please feel free. After the webinar, we also will be sharing this via YouTube for anyone that wasn't able to make the webinar. And we'll also be kind of sharing an email with some useful links and information for you guys as well. So great, I think that's everything from me. I will pass you on over to Dan.
Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, I'm Daniel Wynn, the head of Nature-Based Solutions for Kent Wildlife Trust. So kind of in a nutshell, my team essentially looks at the kind of natural capital markets that we have at the moment, things like carbon, blue carbon, biodiversity, and again, obviously in this context, nutrient neutrality, to see how we can leverage them to get the best outcome for biodiversity, for nature, and scale up and grow our conservation delivery as an organisation. So I'm here today to talk about nutrient neutrality, what it is and kind of what it means. But to do that, I'm just going to zoom out, first of all, slightly to set the context and the situation that led to the nutrient neutrality becoming a thing in the first place. So we'll look at the Stour catchment, the Stour Marsh and Eye in particular. What is the river pollution and why does it matter? Those are the two things. What's actually happening? What's the situation now? Then we'll go into what actually nutrient neutrality is and finish off with how you can help and what you can do to it. So all being well, it should be around 25 minutes, 30 minutes sort of territory, and then we can have hopefully some time afterwards for questions and things like that. So we'll jump straight into it. The area in question, we're talking about the Stour catchment. So you can see on that map there, it drains just over 1,000 kilometres squared of Kent. So it's a pretty damn large catchment. It includes a huge number of water bodies and rivers in that. So the River Stour, the Dower, North and South Streams, and the Oyster Coast Brooks are all part of this catchment. The way the river actually flows, so there's a section is broadly categorised by upper, middle and lower catchment. So the upper catchment is down over near Ashford. In this location, the river is known as the Upper Great Stour or the West Stour. It's either of those two names. So then the Upper Great Stour flows through Ashford. Once it goes past Ashford, it travels on down to Canterbury through Wye. It goes through the rural kind of chalk downlands that we have. This part of the river is called the Lower Stour or the East Stour. It flows through Canterbury, through the Stour Marsh and Hackling Marshes. I'll come on to Stour Marsh in a second. Kind of flows through those NNRs. And at this point, it's joined by the Lower Stour, which you can see on the map is a little bit blurry, so you might not be able to make out the name, but it's essentially that river system in the middle of the catchment itself. That's called the Little Stour. That drains into the main Stour and then it all discharges over at Pegwell Bay. So that's the flow of the river. An important thing to note, a recent census, I say recent, is probably still quite out of date now, but it put the population at around about 600,000 people living in the catchment. I suspect it's higher than that now, but the main take home is that this river's got a lot of pressure on it, a lot of population around the area. There's a lot of different pressures facing the river system as a whole. So let's focus on the Stour Marsh NNR because that's the name that gets a lot of attention, and rightly so. So let's put the location. You can see on the map, if you're not aware of it, it's just downstream of Canterbury near the village of Wingham and Upstreet. And it's a really internationally important wetland habitat. It's got a host of different habitats like reed bed, fens, ditches, wet grassland and open water system. And this is hugely, hugely important for a whole heap of breeding and wintering bird assemblages, but also lots of invertebrates and rare plants. It's got the largest reed bed in the southeast of England, and this is reflected. There's a few species of particular importance. The bittern, the marsh harrier, which you can see pictured there on the screen, but also you've got the less well-known shining ram's horn snail and water voles are all part of the system there. There's a huge heap of nature that basically depends on this. And this is reflected in its environmental protection and designated status. So it's got 4 different levels of protection. It's a triple SI, which stands for Site of Special Scientific Interest. SPA, which is Special Protection Area, an SAC, which is Special Area of Conservation, and Ramsar site, which is European designation for wetland sites. So I guess effectively, this has got pretty much as much environmental protection on this site as you could possibly have, and that just reflects its importance to nature in the area. But it also goes a little bit beyond the importance to nature. If you look at the location of where it is, it's obviously very, very close to Herne Bay, very, very close to Canterbury. So it provides the recreation and green space access for the population in that area. This is a very important national nature reserve for a number of different reasons. So what is the situation? How are we in this position of nutrient neutrality in the first place? Effectively, there's a huge volume of pollution entering the river at the moment, and that pollution comes from multiple different sources, but it's effectively all tied into the sewer system and the sewage system which we currently have. So if you look at the diagram on the left, that's quite a good breakdown of approximately basically how our sewer system works in the UK. So we'll just take a look at that. First issue we have is an outdated sewer system. The UK system probably dates to about the Victorian era, and by then the far less people, the population in the UK was far lower. It didn't have to deal with quite as much sewage and water pouring into it as before, so it was more able to cope with the pressures. But now we've got a much bigger population size, so there's a huge amount of pressure on a sewer system that's functionally very, very outdated now. In terms of the solution to that, while we're talking about it, it's obviously to renovate the UK sewer system would cost billions, trillions of pounds. So I don't realistically know what the likelihood of that is happening, as well as a huge disruption it would take to actually do that. But it's a fact, it's outdated. And the issue we get flows down to, you can see on that diagram, the street storm drains. So our fresh water, the water from the rain that pours off the roads and goes into the drains, that is combined with the sewers from houses and from businesses. This is called a combined sewer. It works its way into the main drain. Now, the issue we're having is when you have these increased heavy rainfall events and the high volumes of water are pouring into the storm drains, it's basically overloading this outdated sewer system. There's too much volume of sewage in there. It can't cope with it. So these overflow structures you can see are basically overwhelmed, and that results in raw sewage being released into the rivers because the system is just not fit for purpose and can't cope with it. And unfortunately, these floodwaters we're seeing are now becoming increasingly more common, and because of the extreme rainfall due to climate change, we're going to just see increasing numbers of these events, unfortunately. So that's two main issues. The second issue is the outdated wastewater treatment. So you can see the combined sewer system there with the stormwater and sanitary waste. There is a flow to wastewater treatment facilities, which are managed by the water companies. The issue with those is that, generally speaking, the water companies have not invested enough money in the infrastructure for those wastewater treatment facilities. They're basically not fit for purpose. And in an ideal situation, what they would do, you sometimes see wastewater treatment abbreviated to WWTW. What they would do is basically scrub the pollution from it through various different filter systems, and then they would release treated water back into the river. In theory, that treated water has no pollution in it. Because these facilities are outdated and haven't been invested, they're essentially not fit for purpose, and so some pollution is getting through the filtration system and is being released into the public water bodies. The final issue is runoff from agriculture. We've already touched upon runoff from urban land, that's the street storm drains, but obviously with increased development, increased roads and all the infrastructure like pavements that go around these developments, that increases the amount of urban runoff. The other issue is urban runoff from agriculture in particular. Again, intensification of land use, changes to agricultural land use practices. There's nothing to stop the water. It hits the soil, it just floods straight off the field and gets into the waterway. And that obviously washes all the chemicals and pesticides and everything that's been used in the agricultural system. It all ends up in the river. And generally speaking, we'll come on to the issues now, but the main two nutrients in question that we're talking about, which you'll hear reference, are nitrate and phosphate. So to link it back to the previous slide, the main source of phosphate comes from wastewater treatment facilities and wastewater treatment works. They've got special filters that are meant to remove the phosphate from them. They're not functioning, so the phosphate's coming into the river system. And the main source of nitrate actually comes from agricultural land, because nitrate's often used in fertilizers to stimulate crop growth, and all that extra nitrate is just washing off the field and ending up in our rivers. The first thing I would say, nitrate and phosphate are perfectly normal nutrients. They're part of the nitrogen cycle. You've got nitrate, and phosphate and ammonia, sorry. They're all part of a natural nitrogen cycle, and plants need that nitrogen in order to grow. So in the right quantities, they're perfectly normal, perfectly natural. The issue we're having is that there are unsustainable and too much nutrients basically in our river system. It's completely out of balance and it can't cope with the excess load of nutrients that it's basically receiving. And the diagram on the right pretty much sums up the process. So like I said, plants actually require nitrate to grow. It's a perfectly normal nutrient. And so, well, when there's excess quantities of it, it's not just the aquatic plants that are growing, but you're also getting growth of things like duckweed and algae. Both of these are particularly problematic because, as you can see from some of the diagrams, they can trigger algal blooms that will cover the surface area, same as the duckweed. That blocks the sunlight. The sunlight can no longer get into the water column. So the aquatic plants lower down in the water, they require sunlight to live, to survive, and to grow. Without that sunlight, the plants are going to start dying. And as that decomposition occurs and the rate of decomposition will increase, the less sunlight is getting into the water. There are certain bacteria that break down plants. To do that, they actually need to use oxygen from the water to achieve it. So those bacteria, they're decomposing the plants, and that's released, and that's using the oxygen that's contained in the water. You'll sometimes see the oxygen when it's in water, it's called dissolved oxygen. It's abbreviated to DO. So that dissolved oxygen is being reduced as more plants die, and effectively you reach something called anoxic conditions, which is where the oxygen levels in the water have reached such a critically low point where life's no longer sustainable or able to survive in there. And so you get fish and organisms starting to die. So these algal blooms create anoxic conditions with no oxygen. Unfortunately, biodiversity in fish will start dying in that river because nothing can survive without oxygen. So these algal blooms are not only fatal to biodiversity, but they can also be harmful to human health. You can see that image is a satellite image on the bottom left there of an algal bloom out at sea. They can cover huge quantities, huge areas of both the river, but also the sea when they get discharged out. And under each of those sections of green where the algae is, you're going to be getting these anoxic conditions because they're blocking the sunlight. You're going to be getting these pockets of low dissolved oxygen concentration, which effectively create dead zones in the water. And for as far as human health goes, you see warnings quite frequently now about some types of algal blooms in lakes can be fatal for dogs, for instance, but they're also going to be pretty harmful to human health as well. So it does impact things like bathing and swimming quality of these areas. And that's unfortunately exactly what we're witnessing in the Stour. So as recently as June of this year, there was a fish kill event. Around 700 dead fish were observed in the Stour near Ashford. That is a huge volume, obviously, of fish that have just died very suddenly. These fish kill events are extremely rare. They don't normally happen unless some the external kind of stimulus or something's happened to trigger this. And in this case, the research found that the dissolved oxygen concentrations in the water were critically low, and the fish died because they were basically choking to death. They couldn't get enough oxygen to survive. And Natural England have conducted water quality analysis for the Stour Marsh National Nature Reserve. And in 2 of the SSSI units, the Site for Special Scientific Interest, the 2 units are lakes. In 2 of the lakes, they observed fish kill events similar to what we've seen in June 2023, and huge algal blooms covering those lakes. And as a result of this, it led to Natural England to declare the Stour Marsh National Nature Reserve as in an unfavourable condition. For NNR, a stress like we've spoke about before, this is a hugely important site for recreation and green space. So the COVID pandemic shone a spotlight on just how important these natural nature reserves and green areas are for people, for the mental and physical health and well-being. So it's really quite criminal that we've allowed an area as important as the Stour Marsh NNR and the Stour in general to become in such poor condition because of this pollution issues. So this leads us on to what is nutrient neutrality. This is kind of the background. This is how it's come into being. So a little bit of a history. In 2018, the European Court of Justice ruled that nutrient loading into a designated site, which has already been in an unfavourable condition, is no longer permissible by law. So you'll remember the Stour Marsh NNR is a SBA and an SAC, therefore it is a designated site. And because Natural England declared it in unfavourable condition, it also meets that criteria. So because of this, any development now in the Stour catchment has to demonstrate no likely significant effect, which is sometimes abbreviated to LSE. So in other words, new development must not have any significant effect on an area, the designated site. This has become what's known as the Dutch case, or the Dutch ruling. In 2020, Natural England followed that on by advising that the Dutch case must also apply to any new development that will increase net population. So that's things like residential developments. And this is particularly pertinent because we've obviously seen a few things recently in the news, hopefully around the sort of challenges to the nutrient levelling up bill and the kind of housing developers. There are multiple sources, hopefully, as I've demonstrated, multiple sources of pollution. But one of the fundamental issues with the housing development is not just the urban runoff it triggers from the infrastructure and the roads and everything else that has to go in place for these new housing blocks to be put in place, but it's also the increase in the population, increase in the amount of people that are using what is already an outdated sewer system that isn't managing our sewer system effectively. You can see there's around 35,000 houses. That figure kind of varies somewhere between 33,000, 36,000 houses currently stored across the Stour catchment as a result of nutrient neutrality. And if you assume the average household population is 2 people, which is probably an underestimate, to be honest, you're looking at around 70,000 people being added to a system that's already struggling to cope with it. In reality, that number will probably be higher because I imagine household occupancy will be a little bit more than 2 on average. So this is what's led to nutrient neutrality. This is what it basically means. Any nutrient from development must be less than or equal to the existing land use. In other words, if a development is to get approval to go ahead, it must demonstrate that the existing land use, say it's an agricultural field, that development cannot put more nutrients into the system than what were already being put in from the existing land use. Or to kind of simplify it, basically the development can't make the situation any worse. It's important to note, nutrient neutrality doesn't make this, it's aiming to not make it any worse. It doesn't necessarily make it better. It's just stopping and slowing down the pollution so that it's a bit more controllable. So that's kind of an important thing to remember. And that's basically where we've got to with nutrient neutrality. That's why it's in existence. And you can see recently, as I just mentioned, the government did try to revoke and make amendments to nutrient neutrality under the Levelling Up Bill. It went to the House of Lords. They have voted against it, which is a bit of a reprieve for the time being. But what that has done is just shed a bit more uncertainty on a scheme that developers, organisations like us, different organisations, environmental charities were starting to come to grips with. It's just added more uncertainty to that. And the bottom line is a fundamental issue. Pollution must stop on these systems. We can't, as I've demonstrated, the evidence is already suggesting the Stour catchment is hugely polluted. It's hugely overloaded with nutrients. It can't get any worse. It has to stop. And that's the onus on that is from all the point sources of pollution, from agriculture to housing development to the wastewater treatment work improvements. They all have to work in tandem with one another to make this situation better. And you can see like some of the examples of the fish. So there's the pike over there, which is a favourite of anglers. There's a huge angling community that uses Stour catchment. Obviously, that recreational sport won't exist if there's no fish left in the system itself. European eels, a ramshorn snail, you can see in the top right, and the beavers that are in the Stour catchment. There's a huge quantity of wildlife that's ripe and on our doorstep that unfortunately we won't see in Kent if we allow the pollution to continue to get worse. So there's many things you can do. Charlie's going to talk a bit more about this, but generally speaking, just add your voice to our campaign, what we're speaking about. Write to your local MP, parish community council, demand that the Dutch case is upheld, demand that the principle of the polluter pays is upheld so nutrient neutrality can exist, and so we can work collaboratively with developers to build a solution that's fit for purpose and generally will help restore nature across the Stour. Thank you, and I'll hand back over to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Dan. I think Dan's going to hang around just in case there's any questions as well towards the end. Thank you very much. So we just wanted to chat through a little bit about, I guess, what you can do as well. What can you do at home? What can you do in your communities? Obviously, please, as Dan says, please do share our campaign. You'll see it across our social media, across our website, anywhere and everywhere that we appear. You'll be able to see the campaign, and not just necessarily ours as well. There's lots of campaigns out there promoting reduction in river pollution as well. So please do get involved in that. You can also volunteer. So there are many ways that you can help our beautiful rivers and help the Stour. We have several opportunities as well. So there's our water vole and otter search volunteers. If you want to help us kind of find signs of water voles and otters. There's also our river search volunteers. So that's about kind of monitoring the health of our rivers as well. You'll find those opportunities on our website on the volunteering page. And there's many other organisations you can volunteer for as well. Obviously the Kentish Stour Countryside Partnership, looking for volunteers all year round. You could become a river warden or a flood warden as well, for example, for the Medway Valley Countryside Partnership also. At home as well, there's lots of ways that if you can, you know, help our rivers as well. So conserve water as much as you can, obviously showers rather than baths, those kind of things. Reducing chemicals, really important as well. So you know, some use of different types of antibacterial agents, for example, can get into our water systems and into our wastewater and therefore into our rivers. Make sure you obviously don't leave litter or clean it up if you do see it round and about. That can obviously have impacts on wildlife nearby. Even things like dog flea treatments, some of them have got things like neonicotinoids in them, which then kill invertebrates. So obviously washing your dog or dog swimming in rivers can increase those levels in our waterways as well. And ultimately, please do support as much as you can. You know, please write to your MP, demand change, ask them to focus on river pollution, to reduce it, to put in kind of laws to change that. And ultimately, you know, if you'd like to become a member or donate, as well as kind of sign up to receive news from Kent Wildlife Trust, then we'd love to see that too. Great. Does anyone have any questions at all? Please post them in the chat if you'd like to, or feel free to come off mute. I feel like I've got a million questions for you, Dan, but I'll ask them afterwards. Great. Okay, well.
Also, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A chat bar.
Thanks, Tash. Let's see if I can access that. Okay. Okay. So Daniel's asking, does the Dutch case apply to the entire Stour catchment, or is it just the NNR?
Yeah, so the there's a neutrality zone that basically is overlaid on top of that Stour catchment. So it effectively it applies to the full neutrality zone, which effectively is the entire of the Stour catchment. Yes, it's because the Stour Marsh NNR is the actual thing that's in an unfavorable condition. It does mean that most of the things upstream of the Stour Marsh are having the most direct impact on the Stour Marsh NNR. But yeah, it affects around 7 or 8 districts across Kent, the Dutch case in this case.
Great stuff. And then also, are you exploring private equity green finance to provide nature-based solutions?
Yeah, that's a big part of what my team is trying to do. So we're working to develop the best sort of solutions that can cross-reference not just for nutrient neutrality, and to develop better like renaturalization of the Stour, get some riparian river buffers in place, and backwaters, generally restore nature on the Stour, all have an impact on the pollution. It better protects it, and we're exploring every possible option as to how we can make that happen at the level of scale that's needed. So we are working closely with some local authorities and Kent County Council to put nature-based solutions as a tool for the delivery of nutrient neutrality mitigation as part of the work we're doing to kind of integrate that finance to sort of allow us to reach the scale of impact which we need to.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. And as we say, please do share the campaign and get involved. Okay. Thank you very much.